Show. Good evening and welcome to the Monday night edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com with you every Monday night from 7 o'clock until 9 p.m., bringing you hopefully information that matters, that's important to the Black community and certainly important to our communities and to the country at large. We're in a very critical time, and of course, today, you all know by now that the Supreme Court, on its last day, issued, which I think most of us who pay attention to this understand what they were doing, um, and what the outcome was going to be. Most of us anticipated this because we have a Supreme Court that has six conservative justices on it and three liberal justices, if we want to put them in a box. Three of those that are on the conservative court were appointed by Donald Trump. And of course, they ruled today in a 6-3 ruling, or they released a ruling that the Supreme Court ruled that the former president, Trump, had some immunity from prosecution in the federal election interference case. The 6-3 decision, which is complex, further delays special counsel Jack Smith's prosecution. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, rejected Trump's broad immunity claims and said that Trump has immunity only for his official acts as president. Now, and of course, official acts are going to now have to be determined. And the fact that they have to be determined by the lower court opens the floodgates. Understand that this was crafted in a way that it absolutely helps Donald Trump down the line. And we're going to talk about it and we're going to dissect it for you so that you understand how this impacts Donald Trump. Not only how does it impact Donald Trump, but how it impacts another would-be dictator, and especially if Donald Trump gets elected. This is not just about him escaping prosecution. If you haven't been paying attention, this is about them rolling back much of the gains that largely Black people have won, fought for, died for, bled for in this country. And certainly, many of those gains have been furthered by this current administration through their policies, which I'm going to talk about, which is important because they are inextricably tied together to reverse any of that and to further what they call their conservative agenda. But that agenda does not include poor people. It certainly doesn't include Black people, and it certainly doesn't include working class people or brown people. So this goes much broader than Donald Trump wanting to escape going to prison. So the High Court did not determine what constitutes an official act in their ruling, leaving that to the lower court. As I explained to you, we're going to talk about that. The court's liberal justices issued a blistering dissent. In her dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said that the ruling breaks new and dangerous grounds. President Joe Biden is scheduled to deliver his remarks, which he did from the White House, or is going to do this evening on the court's ruling. Now, the court made a major ruling during the Obama administration when Samuel Alito decided that corporations were people and they could be unleashed to buy political campaigns and buy politicians, including purchasing Supreme Court justices, as we now know that they've done a pretty good job of doing that. And so we are going to we're going to deal with that. I have an attorney. We tried to get a panel of attorneys to come on with us tonight to really dissect this and to talk about this. But we're going to be talking about it with Patrick Keating, who is an attorney that I have worked with. Citizens to Abolish Red Light Cameras have worked with him. Patrick Keating brought an argument before the Supreme Court on behalf of the people, arguing the legitimacy and the constitutionality of red light cameras, which the oral arguments went before the Supreme Court, and he actually won the vote of the Supreme Court justices, the state Supreme Court justices that were sitting there, of a 3-2 victory. But unfortunately, there has to be a quorum in order for that decision to stand. And of course, there was not a quorum because you had Supreme Court justice at that time, I guess she was the Chief Justice at that time, Ann Burke, who recused herself from the case, arguing that there was a conflict because her husband was a city council member. I don't know why that poses a conflict, because they've made rulings on cases, I'm sure, that involved legislation coming, or certainly ordinances coming out of the council or even the legislature. So pretty convenient. But at any rate, went back down to the decision of the lower court, so we didn't prevail on that. But he's going to be with me at 7:30. We're going to be talking about this decision and what that decision means going forth. So I think there was some pretty blistering and scathing dissents from Sonia Sotomayor, and of course Ketanji Brown Jackson. And we're going to talk about that in the 7:30 hour. Also, we're going to be talking about the Biden-Harris administration and their accomplishments and what they've been able to get done through the 4 major pieces of legislation: the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, the American Rescue Plan, and CARES Act 2. We're going to be talking about that and providing information on how those landmark legislative bills, how policies within those legislative bills are impacting and will impact Black communities for years, decades to come, and how it all can be lost if the November 5th election goes to the Republicans. So not only do we have to win the presidency and re-elect Biden and Harris, we also need to make sure that we take full control of the Senate and of the House. The only way that we are going to dispel what is going on and take this decay that has impacted and infiltrated the Republican Party is that we have got to neutralize this party, neutralize them. And the only way that we can neutralize them is by making sure that we take full majority of the Senate and of the House. We need to get 60 votes, 60 seats in the Senate, and take back the House and make sure that Joe Biden is elected. Now, not in the sense that we don't care about what conservatives or Republicans think, but these extremists that exist. We have the Supreme Court which is a 6-3 lopsided extremist group of Trump appointed extremists who come from the Republican Party. And then we have people within the House and the Senate who enable Donald Trump. And these people don't care anything about the democratic process, democracy. They don't care anything about the law. All they care about is power and advancing their agenda. The reason and the sole reason why these people are ignoring the fact that this is a 34 count convicted felon in New York, who has also been found liable for rape and a number of other things, who's been sued for discriminating against not renting to black people in their apartment buildings. The only reason that they are supporting this person is because they want them in place so that they can write whatever legislation, whatever policies that they want, and he can sign off on them. That is the only reason they want him there. Donald Trump has zero capacity of understanding how to govern. Now, if he gets back in office, he certainly will know how to manipulate those offices to make sure that he forwards his agenda of becoming the authoritarian that he really wants to, and becoming like the people that he admires: Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping. These people who are dictators, these people who torture and starve their own people, these are the people who he admires. And that's who he wants to become. Now, I'm not saying that lightly. That's the reality of how this person speaks and what this person does ever since he came back from North Korea, when he saw this military parade that was given to Kim Jong-un. He came back here trying to figure out and find out how his people could give him a military parade. And that has never left this man's mind, because the only thing that is concerning to him is not about people, not about the American public, not about you. Any of you confused people who somehow, and particularly people from the black community, that somehow thinks that a man who made a policy of making sure that they didn't rent to people who look like you is somehow a proponent of you. You're confused, seriously confused. They're thinking that this man offers something better, and he doesn't offer anything better, and it won't be him that's going to be driving the policy. It's going to be the people who actually know how to get those things done from the conservative side. That's why they want him in office, so that all they can do is give him the grand seat of saying he did such and such because he signed it into law, if they in fact have the wherewithal to pass those bills through Congress. So we've got to make sure that we understand the seriousness of where we are and the gains. And I want you to know, as we go through the painstaking effort, line by line, to demonstrate to you what this president has actually done, what this administration has actually done. That I want you to know. And I'm going to go down each one of them. Not only showing you what's coming out of these bills and the policies as they are positively impacting the lives of working people, poor people, from education to economic and small businesses throughout the country. I want to make sure that you know, coming directly from the United States Treasury Department, which breaks down all of these um, policies. I've gone through, and I'm going through. I can't do it in one seating because these are, giant policies, bills that have thousands of entries and thousands of policies in them. But what we're doing is dissecting and bringing you the information of the policies as directly as they impact Black communities, which when you compare these, there is no comparison to the previous administration. We're also going to talk about the investments that out of these bills that are coming to all 50 states. We're going to be doing that from now all the way up to the election. But understand exactly what is happening here. Understand what is happening with this effort for Donald Trump. It is not for Donald Trump because Donald Trump has some sort of comprehensive plan to help the average American. Donald Trump wants to get back into a seat to ensure that he is not prosecuted on these federal cases, which in a lot of scholars' opinions have been weakened to some degree. And we're going to be talking about that coming up at 7:30. And the other is for those extremist people on the right, the Lindsey Grahams, the Jim Jordans, the Matt Gaetz, and that ilk. Those are the people who will be writing these policies. Those are the people who will be going to the president and saying, this is the bill that we want you to support. This is the bill that we want you to promote. We want to get it passed, and we want you to sign off onto it. That's why they want Donald Trump, because he has, again, no capacity to comprehend being president of the United States in the real sense of being a president, to govern on behalf of making the lives better for people here, and to continue with our partners and allies across the country to keep the world safe. He has zero capacity to understand or to comprehend that, or even cares. Not one single iota. We're going to be talking about that. The other thing we're going to talk about, if we get a little bit of time tomorrow night, I want to make sure that that you all tell your African American men, your Black men, to join me tomorrow night for a special Zoom meeting at 6 p.m. It's on my Facebook page. The link is on my Facebook page. They can grab it from there. Look for the 10 by 10 to win for tomorrow night at 6 p.m. We've got to deal with the violence against Black women that is largely going unresponded to, going silent, and there's no agenda, there's no strategy in place to deal with that. And so we're going to be dealing with that tomorrow night. So I'm calling for 200 black men. We're going to be doing a press conference on July the 19th. So we're organizing that tomorrow night. Tomorrow night and the following week, we're putting together those and making sure that we have a strong commitment of that, because we want to make sure that when we do that call to action, so tomorrow night we're going to be discussing what the call to action is and what we're going to be demanding for. We want to make sure that we put forth such a presence that it brings about a national attention. Dorothy Tucker, CBS 2, Dorothy Tucker did a special on investigating violence against black women, where they studied police reports going back 25 years in Chicago. And the consisting thematic thrust that they found, that black women, being 16% of the population in Chicago, represented 30% victims of all crimes reported in the city of Chicago. And she was able to, in that report, if you have not seen it, you need to see. I'm going to post it up if you haven't seen it on my page. Or you could go to CBS 2's digital and you'll be able to see the report there. It's Dorothy Tucker's investigation of violence against black women. Even in that report, she was able to get the Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx to sit down and to talk about her own violence against her, as she was sexually assaulted as a child and sexually assaulted at school, in college. And of late, 2 weeks ago, she was assaulted in her own community of Flossmoor, where she lives, taking a walk on a Friday morning, where a man by the name of William Welts, driving his pickup truck, screaming at her to get out of the road, and then backed his truck up, almost striking her, and then throwing what they call a big gulp root beer in her face. The idea that men or black women can be attacked because it's a low-level, low-risk crime, apparently based on the numbers. While we, as black men, have to stand up and demonstrate to our black women and girls that we are concerned about their safety and their security. And so what we're going to be doing is we are going to be calling upon our local, our state, and our federal agencies to take action and to come up with a strategy to deal and confront this situation that exists here in Chicago and around the Chicagoland area and around the country, as I'm sure that if studies are being done, if investigations are being done, that I'm sure that they will find that kind of consistency. But for me, it was startling to me when I saw that 90-minute report. It was startling to me. And even in the report, one of the young women who was an attempted carjacking victim at a gas station was one of the interviewees in the story. By the time that the story broke, that same young lady was murdered in her garage by a coworker of another attack. Chilling to watch this. And while you're watching this young woman being interviewed about an attempted carjacking, when the story broke, she had been murdered by her coworker. So this has got to be a call among black men to take a stance, to say, we get it, and we open and put ourselves in place to see to it that black women and girls safety and security while walking the streets. Just to give you an idea of some of the statistics, I don't know if I have them here, but some of the statistics, that I found in the story last year. Here are some of the statistics in the story last year. 277 black women were assaulted at the grocery store while going to the grocery store to buy food for their family. 277 women in Chicago. 162 black women were assaulted in public parks. 47 women were assaulted in church. While in church, 47 women, black women, were assaulted. On public transportation, 769 black women were assaulted going to and from work, or maybe going to pick up their children or whatever on public transportation. And the statistics go on and on and on and on. So we, as black men, have to stand up. We have to demonstrate to our women, to our children, that we do care about their safety and security. And we have to call upon our government to act on this egregious problem. When I first saw the story, it completely changed my perspective and completely changed what my level of responsibility is. And the story came out in January. In fact, it came out the Wednesday before the Dr. King weekend, and the Wednesday before the mayor's interfaith breakfast. I had been invited to go to that breakfast, but I decided not to go until I saw the story, and I changed my mind. And I went to that breakfast on that snowy, ice cold morning, not to go and eat eggs, but I went there to reach out to every black public official that I could, and to make sure that if they did not know about the report, that they did get the report, and I sent the report to them. I also went there to make sure that the mayor's aides understood that in my opinion, I thought it would be tragic if the mayor got up on this celebrated weekend to commemorate the birth and the life and legacy of Dr. King, who fought for equity and who fought for justice, did not speak to something that has been revealed to us that we were not aware of. Sure, we were aware of missing girls and unresolved murders and that sort of thing, but we were not apprised of it to the gravity and to the extent that Dorothy Tucker and her story revealed to us. It completely changed my life. And so the mayor did not mention it. And I was very disappointed about that. But I'm still disappointed because here we are on July the 1st of 2024, 7 months later, and there are very few black men, even black public officials, saying anything about this. So I am calling on all of us African American men that we're going to get 200 of us to make a commitment to do this call of action, to say to our public representatives, you must act, you must do something. This is a state of emergency. It's a state of urgency. It is as critical as COVID to our communities, that we have to do something that women feel safe going to and fro from their homes. They are far more at risk than anybody else. So that's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Go on my Facebook page, get the Zoom link, and please attend the meeting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. We're only going to be 30 to 45 minutes at best, giving you the details and getting commitments from people who are going to be with us on July the 19th. And we're going to tell you the location and all of the other information that is going to be needed. That's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Talk more about that a little bit later on the program. Right now, I want to talk about what all of you have heard about today. And we're going to talk about the Supreme Court justices. They ruled that the former president, Donald Trump, has some immunity. And certainly a lot of people were very angry about this, even though we expected that this extreme group of justices were going to do something like this. It's still just as gut-wrenching. And so I tried to assemble a panel of attorneys, and we're going to continue to do this because I think it's important that we do it. Tried to assemble a panel of attorneys, but I've turned to someone who I highly regard and respect in the judicial realm, and his name is Patrick Keating, and called him and asked him if he would come on tonight and to discuss this and to help us to dissect this and to understand this and to get his take. And so he is joining me now. Patrick Keating, an attorney from in the city of Chicago in Illinois. He's an appellate lawyer, and as I said to you earlier, he argued a case before the Supreme Court on behalf of the citizens regarding the constitutionality of photo enforcement of red light cameras, and argued a great case, and actually won the vote between those that were sitting there. But because there was not a quorum, of course, it went back down to the lower court. Patrick, welcome to the program. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you?
Man, I'm doing great. Despite feeling very frustrated about the Supreme Court ruling of the former president, Donald Trump, saying that, in effect, he has immunity. He's immune to what they said official acts, but they didn't go so far as defining the official acts. So you've had a chance to take a look at the decision. What do you think?
Well, I think really the court punted because despite the fact that we have 100 pages of opinions and dissents, they didn't, for better or worse, they didn't decide that Trump has immunity for anything. They did create a new rule of presidential immunity. It was a rule that really had to be created because there was the situation is unprecedented. There's never been a situation of a federal criminal indictment of a former president. It almost certainly would have happened with Richard Nixon, except for the fact that Gerald Ford pardoned him as one of his first acts upon being elevated to president. So, we've gone over 200 years with nobody having to decide whether there is immunity for criminal acts. But what they really did, certainly cynically, you could say what they did is they bought Trump time until November, because it's highly unlikely that this all gets decided before November. In fact, even in the dissent of the Supreme Court, they said, look, the way to approach this wouldn't be to say, look, Trump has immunity, or any president has immunity. The way to do it would be to say these particular actions were so central to what he does. For example, you wouldn't want a president coming in after, let's say Harry Truman comes in after Roosevelt, and Roosevelt has ordered, World War II And you don't want a president coming in after the fact saying, we're going to prosecute him for all the murders of World War II. So,
Rosie,
I'm sorry?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. So, that's what would happen is the next president would then say, look, no, that's my core job. My core job is to prosecute war. And so you don't say I have a rule of immunity. You should say I should be exempt, or that's a defense. I'm just doing my job. That's a defense rather than saying you can never prosecute me. So it's very unprecedented, but they kicked it back. And so the district court is going to have to now apply this rule and decide if he was in a core or a non-core type of presidential role when he was colluding with the vice president or trying to get the attorney general to twist some arms to find him votes and things like that. So it bought him more time. I don't know what the effect of it's going to be. I mean, hopefully there won't be much effect after this, because this should be an extremely rare case of having a situation where a president, has done these type of things, and then loses the election where he can't control, the prosecutors against him. So I'm not as worried about it as I think a lot of people are.
Well, what concerns me about it is that you could now have people who have aspirations of not necessarily being a president, but certainly being able to, run for president and become president because they could carry out certain behaviors. I mean, some of the scholars were saying, well, look, if his official capacity, if he is ordering something in his official capacity between he and the military, or he and the Department of Justice, that he's immune.
Right.
And so if he asked for a political rival of somebody to be assassinated, he would be immune.
Right. And that's absolutely the fear, and that's what the dissent pointed out. And I think one of the interesting points that the dissent came up with is, look, if the founders of the Constitution, and they made a very valid point, which is that it's usually the conservative majority that talks about the founders' intent. And if the founders had wanted to put immunity for a president in the Constitution, they could have easily done so. And in fact, they did put limited immunity for members of Congress into the Constitution. The Constitution specifically says you cannot arrest or detain a member of Congress on their way to or from a session of Congress or on the floor of Congress. So a congressman could run somebody over on the street, and then if they get inside the building, they can't be arrested, because what they don't want is political opponents trying to trump up, no pun intended, charges against somebody. So, but they didn't do that for the president. And the reason they didn't do that for the president is, if we think about the founding, we were creating a country that was in opposition to the British Empire, to the British monarchy. And there was a lot of debate between the Articles of Confederation and the framing of the Constitution about this title of a person we're going to call the president. We don't want the president to be a king, very much so. And Ketanji Brown Jackson pointed out in her, and there were two main dissents, hers and Sotomayor's, pointed out that we don't, there was a lot of reasons for that. Only kings have immunity. The rest of us might have a defense. If you have a criminal charge, you have a defense. If you're charged with assault and battery, you can raise the defense of protection of life or protection, self-defense or something like that. Those are defenses. And I think all 9 members of the court agreed that there's probably some role where a president should be able to say, it's a defense. Look, I was just doing my job. But the giving them immunity is a much broader thing, and certainly controversial. The good news is it should cut both ways, though. If, for example, Trump does win and decides that he's going to prosecute Joe Biden, or he's going to have his Justice Department prosecute Joe Biden for allowing the migrant crisis or something like that, it does provide it provides a measure of protection to any out of office president against a bad actor. It's actually it's probably more useful when you have a dictator in the White House, that it provides some protection for the people that person vanquished. So it cuts both ways a little bit.
Well, Sonia Sotomayor, she said that the Supreme Court's decision reshapes the institution of the presidency. And I agree with that. She said it makes a mockery of the principal foundation to our Constitution and the system of government, that no man is above the law, she writes. And if the founders did not address it, then some would say that the founders did address it, because it allows for a president to be impeached for a number of different reasons. So, in fact, under, some would say under that premise, the founders did put something in place that presidents can be held accountable, and that they're not subject to immunity for anything. Now, of course, I think that every reasonable person thinks that you cannot hold the president under criminal charges for, say, an act of war. That they are acting on behalf of the nation and acting on behalf of the alliances to keep peace, or certainly to keep world peace, that sort of thing. And whether you agree with the war or you don't agree with the war, it doesn't make it a criminal offense. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they had the impeachment, or have impeachment as a measure to hold a president accountable, or any public official accountable for that matter, says that, I think it's pretty clear in my judgment, that a president is not above the law and does not have immunity.
Well, one thing the opinion pointed out is that impeachment, we think of impeachment as being criminal because it involves charges and a trial and things like that. But impeachment is a truly political process, not a purely legal process. I mean, yes, the Chief Justice, if there is a trial, and the only one that actually went to trial was the Clinton one, and the Chief Justice puts on his fancy robe and sits there and presides over it, but he's really presiding over 100 senators, and you can predict exactly how those 100 senators are going to vote, mm-hmm. depending on who it is they're impeaching, right? So it's really a political process with kind of a legal veneer. I thought that a very valid point that was raised in the dissent had to do with the fact that, again, coming back to the pardon of Richard Nixon, you can argue whether or not that pardon helped the country move on. I mean, that was certainly Gerald Ford's rationale, which was, we have to put this all behind us. I don't want 10 years of litigation. I really don't think Gerald Ford was trying to help out. I mean, yes, it was the guy who had appointed him vice president, but I don't think he was trying to help out his buddy. I think he really was trying to put the nation behind him. But the very fact that everybody agreed in 1974 that the way to move forward was to issue a pardon, that pardon was for criminal liability. So as of 1974, everybody assumed that a president could have criminal liability for bad things he did. And so that was a really, I thought, powerful point in the dissent, that yes, it's a new thing because we've never had a federal criminal indictment of a sitting president or a former president before. But what's also a new thing is the concept that there is actual immunity, as opposed to, like I said, the I'm doing my job defense. Yes, I had to order troops into that battle defense. Those are normal. So it's that's really problematic. I think. I think that the majority was okay. Some of their reasoning was very generally applicable to the fact that we can't have presidents looking over their shoulder about everything they're doing because, oh, am I going to subject myself to liability? And probably the strongest legal argument in favor of the majority's decision was the fact that there had been a case, Nixon versus Fitzgerald, a 1982 case, also a closely divided 5-4 opinion in which the conservative Rehnquist court ruled in favor of Nixon, but that had established a rule. So there was a constitutional case saying, in that case, that the president has some immunity from civil liability. And so the one argument that I think had the most strength for the majority was they said, look, if the previous court, the Rehnquist court, wanted to protect a president from being worried about their civil liability, of course, criminal liability is a much bigger deal. It doesn't just involve money and liability. It involves potentially the loss of your freedom and the loss of your rights. So they had a point there, but clearly until yesterday, there was no immunity, blanket immunity for any actions that U.S. presidents took. And so I think we all knew that somehow this criminal indictment was not going to be decided before November. So in that sense, it changes nothing. But I know it's a source of great frustration.
Well, it speaks to evidence and what they could actually bring forth as evidence. So I would imagine that even in this decision, that it gives Trump's lawyers real grounds for arguing what can be allowed in and what can't be allowed in as evidence in both the Florida trial and the DC trial. So there are those who say that this was a big win for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that I think that the ruling itself, number one, they deliberately took as long as they took, and I think that they obviously did whatever they could do to make this decision that it benefited Donald Trump. I don't think that there's any question about that. That whatever they were doing in the hopes to benefit Trump legally. But just one little note of Gerald Ford. Here's a person who has never been elected to office. He came in appointed as vice president because Richard Nixon's vice president was found out that he was, taking money, and then Richard Nixon gets bounced, and he ends up becoming the president of the United States. Just a little history moment there.
He was an accidental president for sure.
Yeah, he was an accidental president. So, but it was also Richard Nixon who said. Right, Richard Nixon, who said that a president can't be criminally held liable for anything that he does while in office. Mm-hmm. So he believed that a president had absolute immunity. In this case, nobody in the history of the presidency or 200 years have ever brought this argument before a court because, one, we've never had the indictment before. A president under indictment. So this argument, Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, nobody has ever brought this argument before the court. And this was, Trump's attorneys bringing this before the court.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's, the one thing that they teach you in your first semester of law school is that bad facts make bad law. Right. And, if when you've got an unfortunate situation with Nixon doing what he did or Trump doing what, and really even the majority opinion, they have to basically accept the facts in the indictment as true for purposes of the appeal. And so if you're, if anybody's having insomnia tonight, I recommend. Well, don't read it, because you're going to be up all night mad about it. But I mean, 100 pages of Supreme Court opinion can get pretty boring. But even the majority, they basically say, here's what the indictment says. This, he twisted Pence's arm trying to get him to decertify the results. He twisted the acting attorney general's arm, and it makes for, I would say that while they certainly saved his skin in terms of the timing in the election, they didn't try to sugarcoat that anything he did was right.
Yeah. Well, even at that, who really is it that defines what an official act is? Who is that authority? That authoritative body or person? Is that Judge Chutkan, or is that Congress? Who determines what an actual official act is? The court didn't address that.
Right. They punt it. They basically, and I think this reflects Chief Justice Roberts' approach, which is, yes, he's now that it's especially a pretty clear 6-3 majority, he doesn't have to bend over backwards the way he used to. He really hated those 5-4 majority opinions, and so he would always try to get somebody else. Now he's kind of got his 6-person majority, but he really doesn't want to have his fingerprints on history any more than necessary. And so what he did was he kicked it back down to the district judge, and the case that actually came up, the district judge had denied Trump's motion to dismiss. And so while they put a lot of language and a lot of sort of guidance about what is and isn't an official act, at the end of the day, the same person who decided to decline that motion to dismiss is going to be the person who has to decide whether there is any immunity for these official acts. And then I feel, again,
well, they first have to determine what official acts are.
Right. And they muddied it up even more by saying that there's sort of core official acts and then there's outer official acts. And they seem to say, well, core official acts, clearly it's covered. Outer official acts are not, so the question that I think they threw out there is, if you're talking with your vice president or you're talking with your attorney general, is that a core act or is that unrelated? But I mean, they're not talking about legislation or the prosecution. They're talking about an election, which, is arguably anything. I mean, Nixon's crimes were all about trying to get reelected. It is not a core job of the president of the United States to get reelected. The core job of the president of the United States is to faithfully execute the laws. And so I don't know how anything relating to January 6th can be considered a core function. And like I said, maybe Roberts wanted to give Trump a little bit of time, but let somebody else make that messy decision. But I mean, yeah, to the extent the opinion says anything, it says a district trial court should make those determinations, and they would be made before the criminal trial in terms of determining what gets in front of a jury. So basically, they said U.S. district court judges now decide what are official acts.
Well, which is what, in my opinion, is, I believe, their craftiness in sending it back down there, as you say, punt, but sending it to the district court and leaving that open for them to determine what an official act is, which also, because they're the ones who make the determination what an official act is, that it opens up for certain that whatever they decide on an official act is that the Trump team is going to appeal every single one of those.
Yeah, the dissent pointed that out. The dissent pointed out that, look, there is a built-in system here that even though we don't agree with the way that the majority has done it, any criminal criminal allegations against a president are going to be looked at very, very carefully. And there's no president who's not going to be able to afford a top set of lawyers, so these things are going to be looked at very carefully, whether you call it blanket immunity or whether, as the dissent says, maybe you have narrow defenses for doing your job. These things are going to get, so it's actually silly because we've come up to the Supreme Court and they've kicked it back down, and this will assuming that the prosecutors keep prosecuting it, it's absolutely going back up for sure to the appellate court. And this Supreme Court is not gonna, even though less than 5% of cases ever get taken by the Supreme Court, that a case involving Trump in it is going to be one of those 5%
that they take.
Yeah.
Right. To weigh in on. Well, I think that, Chuckton now has to have a separate hearing, even on those. Why wouldn't Congress be the body to determine what official is or unofficial?
Well, that's
what is core and what is not core.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't see any reason other than the practical one, which is that Congress can't get anything controversial done. Right. But I don't think there's certainly no legal impediment from them from passing the Presidential Protections and Immunity Act and defining. Congress could say that there is this, that yes, that we agree. Let's say they could say we agree with, whether or not we agree with the majority's opinion, it is the law of the land. So we're going to take that, and we are now going to define official, say yes, the President of the United States shall have immunity for all actions in his official capacity. And then they could attempt to define what that is, as just a statutory list of A, B, C, D, E. That in itself, of course, will end up in front of the courts. But because it would be interpreting a criminal statute, it might not run into separation of powers. That's really the issue, is that, the Supreme Court often says, well, look, we're not going to get too involved with telling the president what to do or telling Congress what to do because the Constitution says that. And it's, even though we, as the Supreme Court, think that it's our job to interpret the law under the old Marbury versus Madison case from 1824, which is what established that the Supreme Court is the final word, we try not to get too involved in refereeing disputes among Congress and the president because of the and again, it's not a term that's in the Constitution, but it's the separation of powers doctrine. And that term is mentioned here sometimes, which is, even I think Ketanji Brown Jackson said, look, we don't, the majority's trying to say that we should have this power, and we're saying we don't want this power. Like, we don't want the power to be telling the president what to do or not to do. But the Constitution doesn't give him immunity.
Well, the Constitution doesn't give him immunity, but here, as you say, that they don't get in want to get in the middle of Congress's refereeing, but that's exactly what the Supreme Court is supposed to be doing, right? They're just supposed to be saying, "Hey, Congress, you make the laws, right? You make the laws. You have to pass the law. All we have to do is call balls and strike whether or not you made a law within the bounds of the Constitution." That's what the Supreme Court is supposed to do.
Yeah, and a friend of mine who's a law professor made the point that is exactly what they said in the Chevron decision a couple of days ago, that it is not the president's office that determines what the law is. Congress should be writing the laws. And we don't defer to presidential agencies as to what the law says. We, as judges, we are uniquely equipped to referee ambiguities in law. So I think the legal scholars are going to have some fun pointing out that some of the core principles that the majority spelled out in Chevron are somewhat counter to the core principles in this case.
Yeah, well, even in the Chevron case, well, there are certain regulations, and that's what they specifically speak to, by saying that unless Congress has, and I don't have the verbatim, but in effect, unless Congress has specified what those regulations are, that the Supreme Court has, the powers to make that determination or not.
Well, yeah, the issue, and I definitely haven't read Chevron carefully because I was spending my time looking at this, but
Right.
what the Chevron case also dealt with the fact is that Congress has really gotten away from creating the kind of detailed laws that then a judge can apply sort of normal rules of statutory construction to. The law has gotten so complex that Congress just says, let's create the Environmental Protection Agency and let them make a whole bunch of rules. You know what I mean? And then you've got these not unappointed people who may or may not be experts. And that was one of the things that the Chevron court talked about, making all these rules. And so the Supreme Court 30 years ago said, well, we're not in a position to decide whether how to fill in the gaps in what Congress said. So we will defer to these agencies. And what this court has said is, no, we're judges. That's what our job is to do, is to figure out if some government action is being done in accordance with the law or not, and we're no longer going to defer. But that's, that on the one hand, they took away executive power, which I think is, I personally think is generally a good thing. I think that the presidency has gotten too imperial. No matter whether you like or don't like the politics of the person in office, we did create a system where if you look at the structure of the Constitution, Article 1 is Congress. 1 is Congress, 2 is the president, 3 are the courts. And but if we look at who's in charge, we always assume number 2, the executive, is in charge, not Congress. But I mean, the system they set up put Congress in charge, and so you've got to. That's where things should be going.
Yeah, well, but the way that we're set up, there's supposed to be checks and balances, right? The president proposes, Congress disposes, which means that Congress either agrees and moves that agenda forward, or the Congress says, no, Mr. President or Ms. President, whoever it is, you gotta propose something else because we can't come to a consensus on this.
Right.
That's the way that it was supposed to happen. That's not the way that it is happening now, in particular with the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is a very different court than what any of us, whether lay or a lawyer, expect for the Supreme Court to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing, and this really comes back to the red light case we worked on, the Supreme Court, the highest court in any jurisdiction, they like to put on their black robes and say, well, the law and reasoning brought us to these decisions,
Right.
but they are political institutions.
Without question.
They are political. They're either in Illinois, they're voted on directly, and in the U.S., they're voted on indirectly because the president runs on a platform of I am going to appoint justices who do something, who interpret the law the way those of us in our party want it to be, and then the justices all of every side play that game in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, where they refuse to say what they're going to decide because they say, well, it's not before the court. It would be improper for me to rule upon it or to comment upon it, even though everybody knows what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And then they go, and so basically you have, if people want to be appointed to the Supreme Court, they make sure that the people who appoint them know how they're going to rule, but they make sure they don't ever publicly say how they're going to rule. And that's again, that's the court as a political institution, not a legal one.
Right. All right. Well, listen, I believe we were trying to get Catherine Caparuso on, and she's actually watching, and she says that it's more than frustrating. So frustration.
No doubt.
So, and maybe at some point in time we can get Catherine to come on with you, and we can revisit this again, because I'd like to see if we can get you to come back, because Donald Trump is going to be sentenced next week, but on the 11th. He's going to be sentenced on the 11th in the New York case, and certainly would like to see what that, is he going to get some jail time? Probably not. Probably not. I think those of us who would love to see him held to some serious account, because I just think that this is a person who is, devoid of any type of serious judgment. And I think it's going to take some serious consequence to, get him into some, field of reality. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I think that that's going to be the only thing that will let him know that he's not Teflon Don. But so far, he's sort of got most of us thinking that he is, somewhat of a Teflon Don. Speaking of Supreme Courts, and then the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court here, which I think got to its lowest when it decided to subvert the process and not hear the ARDC's complaint or petition to suspend, not even to disbar, but to suspend a convicted felon, federally convicted felon, Ed Burke, and they decided not to hear the ARDC's petition. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, so is that something that's come down just recently? Because
that happened right after his conviction.
And the question is, what do they do now? Because now it's an actual conviction, and
so no. It came this.
I know they were. Yeah,
they brought the petition after his conviction. They brought the petition after his conviction, and the Supreme Court decided not to hear it.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. And one of the problems, of course, we ran into in the red light case is that at the time, and for a very long time, one of the key justices in the state Supreme Court is Ann Burke, his wife.
Right.
And so that's a really, really interesting. Needless to say, it's about as disappointing as anything could possibly be. I have to be very careful because my license remains administered by that body. Mm-hmm. But certainly you could see that there's certainly every member of that Supreme Court knew Ed Burke personally. He was not only the husband of one of their colleagues, he was also the person. Ed Burke was essentially the guy who ran the smoke-filled room for 40 years where judges got slated by the Democratic Party. He was that person. If you wanted to be elected as a judge in Cook County, whether to handle traffic cases or to handle appellate court cases in the first district, you had to pass by a slating committee run by the Democratic Party, of which Ed Burke was the chairman, and you had to sit there just as if you were running for any other political office and basically say how you had helped the party. I got out the vote. All the same stuff. If you're trying to be elected state committeeman or anything like that, you had to prove that you were a good soldier. So you have not only the Supreme Court of Illinois, who are literally his friends, but almost every other judge in Cook County and most of the judges in the first district appellate court who start their careers in Cook County are only judges because Ed Burke said they could become judges. So it's a challenging circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can appreciate the delicate walk there. I can appreciate the delicate walk there, but I don't have a license before that body, and I think it was an absolute. I just think it was a sham, because I think it brought some more discredit to the court, because they used that excuse. Well, in fact, they didn't. What they simply said was they didn't even hear it, so they didn't have to produce a vote of who voted for or against. They just didn't hear it. Period.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that it is because they all knew Ed Burke, I would imagine that on any number of cases that comes before the Supreme Court, that one of them or two of them or more may be familiar with, especially if it's coming out of a governing body like the state legislature or the city of Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
Out of the city council. I just kind of think it was pretty poor that the fact that they wouldn't even, that they basically snubbed the ARDC, right? The very body that is, the checks and balances of lawyers and that sort of thing. And this is the one case where this man has been convicted by a jury of federal offenses for corruption. And they refuse to hear it.
Yeah,
and then,
they certainly, I mean, I'm not aware of any reason why they couldn't have, or why the state legislature couldn't have created for them some sort of a special prosecutor type of statute, or they could have basically said, because 7 of the 9 of us have to recuse ourselves because of our close personal relationship, we are going to appoint, a blue ribbon panel of 9 downstate judges, or who aren't appointed by Ed Burke or something. I mean, there were things they could have done that might have given the public more comfort in the administration of justice in this state.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I don't know if you remember the election that happened back where the young black woman was elected, and she was elected, and she had been elected but had not yet been sworn in, and there was a judge who allowed for her to sit on her bench.
Yes. Right.
Well, not only did they disbar her, they charged her with a crime in record time for that action, and she had not been tried, but they took swift action against her. Unfortunately, this young woman took her life after that.
I didn't realize that.
That died by suicide. So I just kind of make those comparisons. Listen, I have never been a fan of Ed Burke since the day that I set foot on the soils of Chicago, and I've always said, and I've always held, that he was not an honest broker, and that finally came to some reality. All right, well, listen, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Certainly appreciate you coming on and talk about the Supreme Court, and maybe we can get you and Catherine to come back, like I said, in another couple of weeks or so, to talk about what happens in New York with the sentencing of the former president.
I would look forward to that, Mark.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. We appreciate it, Patrick.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, Patrick Keating, attorney and extraordinary and good friend. All right, listen, we are going to shift gears a little bit And well, not a little bit. We're going to shift gears a lot. As I said to you, we're going to talk about this, but I want to first get this. I want to pull this up, and we want to talk about what the Biden-Harris administrations and their accomplishment. So to ask those of you who are watching, get more of your friends to join us for this, because I think this is important. Now, all of us who have participated in some elections going, let's just say going back to the Barack Obama period, we have heard the phrase that this is the most critical or the most important or the most consequential election in our lifetime. Well, I am saying that now that is the case, that this election is the most critical and the most consequential of our lifetime. And for those who are all excited about or spending their time talking about Joe Biden and how he didn't perform, or his poor performance in the debate with he and Trump last week, it was not a good showing. It was not a good showing, but it was one time. It was not a good showing, and certainly, in my opinion, we cannot sum up the entirety of the body of work of what this administration has been able to do in the past 3.5 years, and taking all of his 50 plus years of experience and decisions, good and bad, and learning lessons of wisdom and becoming the president that he has become, and has done a great job of actually investing in America that will produce and impact the lives of people who have been largely underrepresented in this country through major pieces of legislation that this president, in some of the most challenging time that he's been able to get done. So therefore, I believe it is the most consequential election that of our lifetime, and it will be extraordinarily consequential for people from Black community, of the policies that have been put forth by this administration through these landmark pieces of legislation that this president has been able to get passed. Of course, the president and vice president, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, the American Rescue Act, and CARES Act 2. So, and other policies, and dealing with getting the prescription policies passed, where insulin has been capped at $35 a month, and prescription drugs at $2,000 a year. Those are monumental achievements through from this administration, with no help of Republicans, by the way. I know he likes to say that there was a bipartisan bill, but when you only have 2 or 3 people, I hardly call that bipartisan. So at any rate, so we're going to deal with that, and we're going to go through some of those policies for the remaining time that we have. And I'm going to have to do, as I said I was going to do, some additional podcasts where I'm dealing with these and answering questions that people have, and giving you the facts, because I want you to be armed with the facts. The information that I am bringing you is not Mark Wallace opinion. This is the information that comes directly out of these policies from the United States Treasury Department that releases a report on policies that are passed by this administration. And they've also provided us with the information on the historically equitable economic recovery that has happened for underserved communities, in particular the Black community. So we're going to talk about that. I want to share that information with you, and so that you will know exactly what this administration has done and is doing on behalf of the American public and on behalf of the Black community. So let's get into it. Let me pull up some information here. I want to first pull up the information that I had recorded, and what the president has been doing. Let's go to all right. So I'm going to pull it up by. We're going to pull it up by state. Let's see. Let me see. I pulled that up. Wait 1 second. Okay. Okay, here we go. We're going to do this by state. So we're going to do it by states. All right. So in all 50 states, out of these 4 bills we're talking about. So we're going to start right here in Illinois, where the president, coming out of these bills, how he is investing in America, in our very state, right here in Illinois. Out of these bills, the president and vice president were able to get bills passed that passed $8.4 billion in private sector commitments and $16.6 billion in public investment in clean energy, in infrastructure, and in manufacturing. $2.1 billion funding from the administration to provide affordable, reliable, high-speed internet to everyone in Illinois. $11.1 billion for transportation investments. That's in roads, bridges, public transit, rails, ports, and airport, as well as electric school buses and transit buses, and of course, electric vehicle charging stations. $2.6 billion in private sector commitments to invest in electric vehicles and batteries. Now, remember, they built or are building the electric plant out in Kankakee, which is it's a $2 billion investment that is going to bring, I believe it's 2,000 jobs, and each one of those jobs, the average salary is $89,000 a year. I shouldn't say average, but the starting salaries are $89,000 a year. Now, $89,000 a year in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. Now, there have been people, I've been talking about advanced manufacturing ever since I saw the Golden Triangle and what they did down there in the poorest region, the poorest state in the country, in Mississippi. What they've been able to do down there and to address the economic deprivation that persisted down there, where they had lost 24 of their industries, manufacturing industries and factories, and they had record unemployment at 20%. They brought in an economic developer, and that economic developer in this 3-county area of Activa, West Point, and Columbus, they considered that to be the Golden Triangle. And they brought those three together, and they did a joint venture, and they hired the economic developer and brought the economic developer on and told the economic developer, build us a movie theater, and we'll consider your job as a success. And of course, he built the movie theater. The problem was unemployment was at 20%. Nobody could go to the movie theater because they couldn't afford to go to the movies. So what he did was he got them all together and said, we've got all of this land out here. This is opportunity. Give me the dollars to put in the infrastructure of roads, water, electric, all of the utilities needed in order for him to go out and attract industry to come to the Golden Triangle. Now, keep in mind, this is the poorest region of the poorest state in the United States of America. And this guy by the name of Joe Max Higgins, he and his economic development team of 7 staff members got these 3 county of public officials, Republicans and Democrats, black and white, to operate in a new mindset of actually winning for people. It took some doing. This didn't just happen overnight, but I'm giving you the condensed version. So they gave him what he needed in terms of the dollars to put in the infrastructure and the roads and all of that. He goes out and he gets 3 of advanced manufacturing industries to come in: a helicopter building plant, an advanced steel manufacturing plant, and a German engine truck plant to come in and to bring their businesses to this area. My dog is having problems with the fireworks. And what they did was they partnered, they got the businesses, gave them the tax breaks under the conditions that they were going to hire and train from the workforce and the community and the people there in the region, and they were not going to import people in, and that they would train them. So what they did was they partnered with the community colleges in the region. And as they were building the plants, they were training the people in the community colleges to operate the plants. And by the time that they got these plants up, they had 6,000 jobs. The first phase was 6,000 jobs, $6 billion in industry between these 3. 6,000 jobs. Now, before, the average 4-person family, we're talking about the importance of manufacturing. The average 4-person family in Mississippi, in Columbus, in the Golden Triangle area, the average 4-person family earned between $24,000 and $32,000 a year. That was at the time, this was in 2016. And that was at the time that the largest employer in that area, Sara Lee, closed up shop. 2,500 jobs out, just like that. Joe Max Higgins brings in these 3 industries. They train these people, retrain them in a whole different area. And as a result, $6 billion in industry, 6,000 jobs, and The average earning for those jobs was $65,000 to $112,000 a year in the same Columbus, Golden Triangle area where people were only earning $24,000 to $32,000 a year prior, now earning $65,000 to $112,000. I'm fast forwarding to now. Well, they were able to take unemployment from 20% to just over the national average in less than a decade. So they were able to do all of that in less than a decade in the poorest region of the country. Fast forward to now, they now have more than 25,000 jobs, 21 different advanced manufacturing companies, have generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the local and the state governments. And it's been so successful that they've been able to build their own $38 million training facilities. And so when people are coming out of those training facilities, they have a job, full-time job, waiting for them to go and work in one of these advanced manufacturers. That is the same model of all of Mississippi. The city of Chicago's GDP is greater than the GDP of all of Mississippi. So I told you that story because out of the president's bill, there's $8.4 billion in private sector commitments and $16.6 billion in public investment. That's in infrastructure and manufacturing. In the city of Chicago, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, all of Black employment, 70% of all Black employment, 70% of all Black employment was in labor, in manufacturing. That's where 70% of the workforce of all employment, of Black employment in the city of Chicago, which built a middle class, stabilized communities, supported Black businesses in our communities, which ultimately kept strong, stabilized communities. Because there was a strong workforce. By the time that Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, his whole trickle-down theory of tax cuts and tax breaks and deregulation and unenforcement of antitrust laws for corporations dismantle a large part of the workforce, and as a result, high rates of unemployment in the Black community. The small to mid-size industries could not compete, and because the antitrust laws were not being enforced, it allowed for conglomerates to soak up small companies. And so we had a void in the Black community on the south and west sides of Chicago. And nobody, to this date, nobody has come up with a plan to replace or to have reinvestment in these areas. Now that the Biden administration has passed these landmark legislations, and all of this money is coming to the city of Chicago, to the state of Illinois, we need to make sure that there is investments here. Now, on Saturday at Rainbow Push, I ran into the mayor The mayor and I had a brief, very brief conversation. He wanted to, one, thank me for an email, which was a critical email that I sent to him about a couple of things. And one in particular, that I gave him this study that Harvard University School of Business did on the Golden Triangle. Gave him that study, gave him the plan, as I did his predecessor, Lori Lightfoot, which I had one meeting with their economic development people, and that they did nothing with the plan. Now Brandon Johnson has it. And so I said, if they're building industry in Belvedere, great. They're putting industry in Kankakee, great. We need industry on the south and west sides of Chicago, of advanced manufacturers, attracting those businesses to bring their business to Chicago, to our communities. Would be transformational for our communities, so that they can train the people in our communities and hire from the people from our communities, so that people in our communities, young men and women, even those that have some, scratching dents on their records, that they could have an opportunity at a job earning $89,000 a year. You think that a person who has had some problems won't change their activity for a job at $89,000 a year? Yes, they will. We have to create those opportunities. We have to bring back those kind of opportunities. Well, the president, the administration has done that through the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Bill, and the CARES Act 2. They've done that. They're sending the money to the states. And the states, we have to make sure that the states are doing what they need to do. So let's just talk about some of the things that are coming out of these policies that's impacting Black communities. Now, again, this is a report that comes from the United States Treasury Department. All right. So you can go and you can verify this same information that I found, you can find. So over the past 3 years, the Biden-Harris administration has advanced racial justice. Now, we're talking about how this has impacted Black communities and Hispanic communities, in particular, the Black community. On racial justice and equity to ensure the promise of America on all of our communities across the country. With the support of these efforts, Black Americans are starting new businesses, creating jobs, buying homes, and taking advantage of the increased educational opportunities at historic rates, contributing to a 60% increase over the last 3.5 years in wealth building compared to before the pandemic as a result of these policies. And one of the ways that they have been able to do this is to make sure that the SBA has been available to new startups and Black businesses in terms of growing economic opportunity for Black families through the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and of course, CARES Act 2. These executive orders that this administration has signed, the federal investments through the president's landmark Investing in America agenda are equitably flowing through communities to address long-standing economic inequities that impact Black people's economic security, health, and safety. In what ways have it done it? Okay, so now we're talking about how they've impacted Black communities. So they powered a historic economic recovery that created 2.9 million jobs for Black workers and achieved both the lowest Black unemployment rate on record and the lowest gap between Black and white unemployment on record. Now, let me just kind of pause a little bit. Again, these are all as a result of these bills: American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Bill, CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, that had no help from Republicans. Now we have a long ways to go, right? If we can get and have all of this to happen in 3.5 years, and Lord knows we've been waiting a long time for this type of growth. Now, this is only the start, not the middle, not 3/4, not the end. This is a start of where they should have been administrations ago. So we have to play the long game. So we have to make sure that these policies don't get wiped away so that they can reverse some of the repair, right? Because this can be considered some part of starting reparations, repairing the breach, repairing the damage. This is what I'm going over with you, is some start of that. The child tax credit cut in half the number of Black children living in poverty in 2021 through the American Rescue Plan's child tax credit expansion. So in the American Rescue Plan, right, I talked to you about that. In that major piece of legislation was the policy of the child tax credit that provided money upwards to $600 per child per family per year. So all of that, never done before in anybody else's administration. Some great things had been done through the Obama administration. Nothing to this level. Nothing to this level. Not only the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, the Carter administration, the Reagan administration, both the Bush's administration, going all the way back, the LBJ administration. So for those who, and this is just a little bit, and I'm going slow because I want to make sure I cover it all, and I want you to come back. I want you to bring some others back so that they can get the information and you can share the information with them of what this administration has actually done that impacts Black lives. Because when Black communities and Black people lives are improving, it improves the lives of everybody else. Because Black people have been at the bottom so long, so when you start to lift Black people up, everybody else above does better. So when you have people who've been at the bottom that are doing better, guess what? They're going to spend some of those betters with other people. So other people who have the businesses and who have the industries, who sell the goods and services and the products, are going to do better. That's the reality. In the bill, as I said, they're starting to reverse the disinvestment of infrastructure, which included a $4 billion reconnect communities that were previously cut off from economic opportunities by building needed transportation infrastructure or in underserved communities. Connected an estimate of 5.5 million Black households to affordable high-speed internet through the policy coming out of those major legislations of the Affordable Connectivity Program. Helping Black-owned businesses. Since the president went into office, a record number of 16 million new business applications have been filed, and 62% of Black households owning a new business has more than doubled, building on the momentum coming out of the Biden-Harris administration. Black-owned businesses have doubled coming out of, as a result of these policies of the Biden-Harris administration. They've achieved the fastest creation rate of Black-owned businesses in more than 30 years and more than double the share of Black businesses ownerships between 2019 and 2022. Since 2020, the number and the dollar value of the Small Business Administration backed loans to Black-owned businesses have more than quadrupled. Launched access to federal contracts for small businesses, awarding a record $69.9 billion to small disadvantaged businesses in just 2022. Federal government, federal contracts. Now, the government spends about $600 billion a year on federal contracts. Under the previous administration, what they did was they bundled these contracts so that the only people who could compete for those contracts were large businesses. Small businesses could not compete. Small businesses couldn't bid. So you had a small business, you were left out. So only the big, large companies could participate. coming into the Biden-Harris administration, they unbundled the contracts so that there were more opportunities for small businesses to compete and bid on contracts. And as a result, $69.9 billion to small disadvantaged businesses in 2022. Through the Treasury's State Small Business Credit Initiative, invested $10 billion to expand access to capital and invest in early stage businesses in all 50 states, including $2.5 billion in funding and incentive allocations dedicated to support the provision of capital to underserved businesses, with $1 billion of these funds awarded to jurisdictions that are most, to those local governments reaching underserved Black communities. Helped more than 37,000 farmers and ranchers who were financially distressed, including Black farmers and ranchers, stay on their farms, keep farming, thanks to the resources provided through the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act allocated $3.1 billion for the Department of Agriculture to provide relief for distressed borrowers with at-risk agricultural operations with outstanding direct or guaranteed Farm Service Agency loans. The USDA has provided over $2 billion in counting in 2022. Supported small disadvantaged businesses through the CHIPS and Science Act, funding by requiring funding applicants to develop a workforce plan to create equitable pathways for economically disadvantaged individuals in their region, as well as a plan to support procurement from small, Black-owned, veteran-owned, and women-owned businesses. Created the $27 billion, with a B, $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund that will invest in clean energy projects in low income and disadvantaged communities. There's quite a few people in small Black-owned businesses that are into clean energy. So whatever the area that people have interest in, this administration has made sure that they are investing in these communities. And how is that happening? Because in the Biden-Harris administration, I have to get those statistics and see what they are. They have more Black people heading up department agencies than any other presidency under the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, it's got the first female Black vice president, appointed the first female Black Supreme Court justice. And on and on. Dealt with the housing and discrimination that continues to happen. Set up the first ever national infrastructure to stop evictions, scaling up the ARP-funded Emergency Rental Assistance Program in over 400 communities across the country, helping 8 million renters and their families stay in their homes. Over 40% of all renters helped are Black. And this support prevented millions of evictions, with the largest effects on majority Black communities. So these, and I've just gotten through a few. I want to get to the next time. I want to get to, the other. I mean, there's just loads of data here that are all impacting Black communities. That's coming out of these policies, out of these four major pieces of legislation, how Black communities are being positively impacted. So for all those people out there who want to say, well, the Biden administration, Joe Biden ain't doing anything for Black people, you're wrong. You just haven't read, you just haven't researched the information. They are wrong. And you can make sure that you take them the information. So I am going to put a pin in it right there. And that was just the start of it. We got a whole lot more to go. About the Pell Grants, health outcomes for Black families. We're going to be talking about the next time. We're going to be talking about all of that. So I'm going to put a pin in that. And the next time that we come back, we're going to talk about that. Now, tomorrow night, again, I just want to reiterate, please, sisters, brothers, get your Black men and ask them to join us tomorrow night so that we can organize this call of action to deal with the safety and security of Black women. Black women are moving around at higher risk than any other ethnic group. 16% of the population of Chicago, yet they're 30% of all crimes reported going back 25 years. Brothers, we have to stand up. We have to stand up for our women. We have to show our women that we actually care about what is going on with them. And we also have to stand up and say to our government, you have to care. And we are demanding that you take notice, and take action. Tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, please join us for this Zoom meeting to talk about the details of what it is that we're doing. We want to get at least 200 men to be present at the press conference. So tomorrow night is the organizing meeting. So we're asking for you to all come and participate in this meeting, get the information so that you can reach out to your trusted circle and bring brothers in to be a part of this call to action. We have to do, and we have to demonstrate this. Many of you have daughters. Many of you have wives. Many of you have sisters. All of you have had a Black mother. So we are responsible to our women. It was said to me by Tara Stamps, who was Cook County Board Commissioner, when I had a conversation with her about this. She said to me, this has got to be led by men. If Black men don't stand up, and if Black men don't show that Black women matter, it's all over for us. And she's right. If we are not standing up saying it matters, and we're going to make sure that our public officials make sure that it matters, it is over. It is over. But we're not going to let that go by quietly. All right, listen, I want to thank you all. Thank you, Patrick Keating, attorney Patrick Keating, who joined me tonight to talk about the Trump immunity decision coming out of the Supreme Court. I want to thank all of you who've joined us for the program. Make sure that you tune in and look for another show. I'm going to come back Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. I'm coming back Wednesday night at 9 o'clock to do more on this. All right. Wednesday night, make sure that you tune in for another edition of the People Show on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. Thank you so much. We'll see you the next time. You can't sit on the sideline. You got to get in, got to get active. See you tomorrow night.